just need the thing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Cooper and I'm the General Manager of Corporate and Development here at the City of Burnside. I would like to welcome you here this evening and for the viewers via our live stream broadcast to this, the 2019-2020 Annual Business Plan and Budget and Long-Term Financial Plan Community Meeting. I would like to start proceedings by acknowledging that we are meeting on traditional country of the elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to people living today. I'd also like to welcome the elected members who are in attendance this evening. We have Mayor Anne Monceau and Councillors Mike Dawes, Sarah Hughes and Jane Davey. Thank you for joining us this evening. I would also like to introduce some senior staff here this evening that will also be helping with proceedings. We have the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Paul Debb, Bernie Orrick over in the far right-hand corner, who's our Strategic Community Engagement Officer. Bernie is going to facilitate proceedings this evening. Karishma Reynolds, on my right, the Group Manager of Finance and Governance. Karishma will actually present the draft budget and long-term financial plan to you this evening. And over on our hot desk computer this evening, we have Rafaela Brown, who will be coordinating questions that are submitted by the live stream. Alan Harvey, who's our Acting General Manager, Urban and Community, is next to Raf. Michelle Kennedy joins us on the front table as the Group Manager of Assets and Infrastructure. Belinda Portelli, Group Manager, Community and Connections, is here this evening, as is Aaron Schroeder, Strategic Projects and Planning Manager. And also a thank you to Helen Nikotenko for helping us with the systems this evening. Thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. The public toilet is located at the end of the corridor on your right as you exit the council chamber. The fire alarm, if you do hear the fire alarm this evening, then please follow the directions of staff to the nearest exit. We are very much looking forward to your participation and questions being submitted this evening, either directly in the chamber or via the live stream tonight. For those of you on the live stream, there is a note on the screen which will give you the email address to use, but just in case you need a reminder, please submit any questions to engage@burnside.sa.gov.au. That's engage@burnside.sa.gov.au. And we will be taking those questions and submitting them to the administration for responses at the end of the session during public question time. If we are not able to answer those questions this evening, we will take those on notice and will provide a copy of all of the questions and responses, both answered this evening and taken on notice, on our website by close of play Monday the 3rd of June. For those in the gallery, again, welcome. If you have any questions this evening, it would be much appreciated if you could hold those questions until the public question time at the end of Karishma's presentation. If you have any burning questions and you're afraid you might forget them, we've provided you with post-it notes and a pen to just make a note of those. So without any further ado, I will now hand over to Karishma. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for taking time out to attend the meeting today. And thank you to all the viewers who are watching at home as well. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is, of course, to consult with the community on our draft business plan for 2019 and 20, but also for the first time consult on our long-term financial plan. In the past years, we've had feedback from the community asking to be consulted on this plan, so it's my privilege to present this plan to you and get your feedback. So the purpose for tonight is to give you a quick overview of the budget process, talk about the cost of business for council, quickly just touch on the highlights for next year's budget, talk about the financial results that will be resulting from the assumptions made, talk about some of the operating and capital proposals for the budget next year, and then, of course, as usual, do some benchmarking with some other neighboring councils in terms of debt and rates. And then we'll also talk about the long-term financial plan, looking at the 10-year period, and then the next steps for the community and our consultation. To start with, just a quick snapshot of our community. Now, this is very important because it really drives what services we provide. As you can see, there's just short of 46,000 people in the city of Burnside. There's about 2,800 couples with young children. What this means for us as an administration is, parks, recreational facilities, open spaces are quite important in the city of Burnside, given the number of couples who have young children and the demographic. You'll also see that a number of households make very high mortgage payments, a reflection of the valuation of our houses and the prices that you need to pay to live in the city of Burnside. We do have a number of residents who are from other cultures as well, with only 3% of them having difficulty communicating in English. I think the majority of our residents who've come from overseas are from China and India as well. The key philosophy that Council has kept in mind while drafting the annual business plan and the long-term plan are essentially to keep rates affordable for the community. Every year we try to keep rates as close to the LGPI as possible, and to keep the community in mind, really. The vacant land differential rating in previous years has been 150%, which means that vacant landowners pay 50% more than the residential landowners. This year, the proposal is to increase that to 200%. So vacant landowners will pay double of residential landowners. However, keeping in mind that the valuation will also be less than the residential landowners. Council currently provide 118 services that's maintained through this plan. We'll maintain the assets to the adopted condition levels. Council undertakes debt only for new capital items, keeping in mind intergenerational equity principles. And the debt is taken out for a period of 15 years. Now, we do have some savings targets. In the prior years, we've had about 570, half a mil as a savings target. And from next year onwards, we've decided to continue this target at 1% of our employee materials cost, which is 370,000. We've also just recently completed the LED lighting project, and we're expecting around $400,000 in savings in 1920. If there are any one-off cost pressures, Council tries to absorb it instead of passing on to the community. And we, of course, need to make sure that all our ratios in the long term as well are sustainable and within the recommendations. And lastly, we budget with moderate surpluses. So we're not looking at making big buckets of money. We're not looking at going into deficit. We maintain the view that we just operate with around $500,000 to $1 million in surplus. Of course, the Annual Budget Balancing Act, as you can imagine, it's all a balance between services, what the community expects, what Council can afford, the capital projects, how much debt to take, over what period of time. So when we do get requests from the community, we do need to keep in mind the affordability as well. A budget timetable, just to give you an idea of how extensive this process is. It spans for over 9 months, starts in October, November with our annual community survey, which is a real key driver to the annual business plan each year, and concludes in June with the adoption of the budget by Council. The annual community survey, as I mentioned, is a very integral part of the budget, and that's because it's the community's way of stating what they would like more focus on and the top performing services by Council. From a business plan perspective, it's important for us to make sure that we are actually allocating enough funding for the high-performing services, as well as focusing on the ones that we're not doing so well in. The overall satisfaction is 7.1, and it's also important to mention that the timing of when the survey is undertaken is also important and reflects in the scores. So last year, the timing was around the election time, and where you see the bottom 4 attributes, it does talk about elected members, etc. So just keeping in mind that they're probably talking more about the previous term. In the bottom 4 attributes, there are a number of other items that have been mentioned, such as financial management, and there are a number of initiatives we're undertaking to make it more transparent. For starters, consulting on the long-term plan. We're looking at doing an internet page with all the financial management reports to be published monthly, credit card transactions, etc. Street trees, that's another one that's in the bottom 4. So of course, we spend a fair bit of our budget on street trees, and we're also looking at further incentives to make sure that we're providing and maintaining the canopy. So our key challenges for 1920, very similar to other years as well. It's, of course, all the legislative changes. There's a lot of cost shifting at times that comes to us from state and federal governments. Litter and nuisance bill, for example, solid waste levy. There's, of course, utility charges that are on the rise. So again, taking you back to the balancing act of, making sure that council absorbs the cost pressures without passing these on to the ratepayers. So cost of council business, essentially what this is us trying to work out what is the cost for City of Burnside to deliver all of its services and maintain all the assets in 1920. So instead of using just a generic CPI or LGPI index, we actually customize it to make sure we've captured all our savings and all our cost pressures. As you probably know, CPI and LGPI are the two indices. CPI being the Consumer Price Index, which is more for households, how much has bread, fuel, etc. gone up by, and LGPI is more relevant to local government. So it's a local government price index, which considers things like bitumen and things that local government, it's more specific to local government rather than households. So essentially, in summary, what we've come up with is the cost of council business is 3.3%, and with our savings target taken off, we arrive at 2.4, which is what the proposed rates increase is for next year. Savings targets, as I mentioned earlier, so for the last 3 years, we've actually achieved more than $1.7 million in savings, and we are continuing to give ourselves a target for next year as well. And for next year, all up with the LED savings, which we are expecting anyway, we are hoping to achieve at least 800. This is not to say that we will stop once we achieve that target amount. We do continue we're consciously looking for savings, and we'll continue, putting in any other initiatives we can to achieve any savings. Just some budget highlights for next year. So of course, we've got the 2.4% rate increase, which is lower than the December LGPI of 2.7. We've still delivering 118 services. We've got a healthy operating surplus. Savings, as I spoke about, is 800 in total. And we've got a number of capital projects for next year, including Kensington Gardens Reserve, McGill Village, of course, Brown Keswick Creek, footpaths, curbs, playgrounds, etc. We've also got about $500,000 in other projects, and our debt position for the end of next year is $16.3 million. So what's not included yet? So keeping in mind that the draft budget was drafted in April, and there have been some changes since then. So these are some things that are not included in the draft version of the budget. But when we present the budget for adoption to council in June, we will take these into consideration and revise the budget. So we had an asset revaluation. There was a reduction in depreciation that we'll factor in. There was a native tree incentive that was resolved at council that we'll include in the final budget as well, which is essentially promoting tree plantings in the city. Any other cost pressures or any other savings that we can identify, any adjustments from the recent budget review from last night, actually. Of course, the subsidiary profit and loss, any projects that need to be carried forward, carried forward, and the final cost of business adjustments. So from the recent LGPI index, that's reduced from 2.7 down to 2.1. So we will make some adjustments, and we'll redo the cost of business for next year. And that'll be a consideration that council makes in terms of rates increases, etc. Of course, the impacts from the federal budget are not completely known in terms of dollar figures. We know there's an increase in grant funding, but we are not aware of exactly how much yet. So hopefully before June, we'll know the exact amounts we can factor in. So a quick snapshot is just to show what our major source of revenue and expenditure is. So revenue, no surprise there, rates accounts for 84% of our revenue. And in terms of expenditure, the three main areas are really depreciation, employee costs, and materials and contracts. And then you can see the capital expenditure is split 2/3 and 1/3 across renewal and new. So some of the assumptions, and this might be touching on what I've spoken about already. So we've got the savings target. The differential rating is currently 200%, so if there's any changes to that, the surplus will of course change. There's no change in the staffing level. It's still based on 161.22 FTEs. There's no change in the grants. The growth is assumed at 0.5. And of course, as I mentioned, the cost of business is based on the December index. So just quickly, financial indicators, it's all looking good. We're all in the green for next year, and we have been for the past 4 years. And it's essentially showing the target by the LGA and how council is performing. So as you can see, our operating surplus is just under $1 million, be a 2% ratio, and our debt to income level is 33%. And asset sustainability, which shows how the assets are maintained, is 98%. So a comparison of where we thought we'd be 2 years ago, the last adopted long-term plan, and what we're now proposing. So I'd just like to point out a couple of key things in terms of how we've actually improved the budget compared to what we thought we would be doing 2 years ago. In terms of rates, we've gone out with 2.4 instead of 2.7, which is what we had in the long-term plan. Staffing levels have increased just slightly by 0.3. We've included a savings target in there, which wasn't there in the original long-term plan. The operating surplus has increased and debt has decreased. A quick overview of some of the projects we've got. So in our operating projects and services, essentially what this means is for operating projects, it's 1 or 2 year projects, short term, and new services is something that we'll provide on an ongoing basis. So the top 3 there, the historical cultural officer, Verge upgrade, and the Pepper Street internet upgrade, those are new services. And all of the other ones are just projects, so one-off projects. And of course, the Green Hill Road one is a new service as well, because that's a pedestrian crossing that we're looking at. There's other items in there, the projects which include a strategic plan, includes neighborhood budget, mapping the cycling routes in the city of Burnside, Mount Osmond landslide works, etc. Draft capital projects, now these are all new projects, which is what we use debt for primarily. And we've got a number of projects in there, which include the Penfold Park toilets, Glenunga Hub activation, Cottingham Street Depot, which is one of the bigger projects undertaken this year, McGill Village Pleckworks, Wheel Park concept design, which is currently under consultation. So that's part 2 of that. Drainage, Civic Center upgrades, Constable Hyde, and of course Kensington Garden Reserve Master Plan. There's, of course, renewal and replacement. So essentially, this is just maintaining our current network of roads, footpaths, curbing. It's no new assets. It's all just being renewed or replaced to maintain the service capacity and in line with the asset management plans. Council debt. So, of course, we've got a number of debenture loans And we do, as I mentioned before, we do take out loan for 15 years, and we do fund our new capital projects with debt. We will talk a little bit later on about the various options we can utilize to fund capital projects, but council chooses to use debt, keeping in line with the principles of intergenerational equity, which means we spread it out over the life of the debt term, and people who are using the facility then pay for the facility instead of the other way around, where you save up in advance and people who've paid might not be using the facility in future years. So all up, our balance currently is 16.3 million. We are hoping or projecting to be at 16.6 by the end of next month. And next year, we're actually projecting a reduction in debt, but that's primarily because of the grant funding we're expecting to get. So a few things, of course, council debt and personal debt are fundamentally very different, especially because council does not have a finite revenue generating capacity. And again, as I mentioned, we only take it out for new capital because renewal should be funded by depreciation. And any surplus cash we get, we use it to repay our debt. So there's no cash reserves maintained as such. So as I mentioned earlier, there's really three ways of funding your capital projects. There is, of course, the option of not doing any new capital projects at all, and that would lead to an asset backlog, potentially. But the two primary ways of funding a capital project is either through debt or through rates. So just as an example, if we have $5 million in debt over 15 years at 4.1%, we do pay $1.7 million in interest cost. However, on the flip side, if we do it through rates, to fund $5 million in capital projects, we would have to raise rates by about 15% for this year, just to fund $5 million. So every year that you have capital projects, you would have to raise additional rates if that's how we choose to do it. So every 1% increase in rates is about $390,000 in revenue that comes in. So council chooses to use the debt option, again, as I mentioned, which yes, there is an interest cost component to it, absolutely, but then it does balance out the intergenerational equity concept as well. So some benchmarking. How do we compare with some other councils? This is for 2018-19. So we're sitting at about 15.7 mil in comparison to Campbelltown, who have absolutely no debt, and Playford, who have $164 million in debt. Completely different demographic, completely different councils, but just a benchmark to show you where we are sitting in comparison of some of the other councils, probably Unley, Norwood, Campbelltown being more comparative to Burnside. The debt level by rateable property, this makes it a little bit more, I guess, apples for apples, because all councils have a number of different rateable properties, and just looking at debt in isolation doesn't really say much, really. So if you compare this chart, you will see the Burnside. So for every property that we have in Burnside, we have $760 in debt, compared to, again, Campbelltown, who have nothing, Adelaide Hills, who are very similar to us, and Playford, who are just on the complete other side of the spectrum. So how are your rates calculated? Now, there's a very common question that I get pretty much every year is, rates are going up 2.4%, but my rates have gone up by 10%. How is that possible? So when we say the rates are going up by 2.4, we always say it's an average increase of 2.4, because what we look at is the entire council rates for the entire area, so all properties. The average increase is 3.2% as of today from the Valuer General. So essentially what that means is if one person's property goes up by more than the average of 3.2%, then their rates bill will be higher than the 2.4%. But if your property goes up by less than the average movement of the city of Burnside, then you'll get a bill that's less than 2.4%. Now that I've confused everyone, I'll just explain how this works. So essentially, at council, we work out what are the council rate revenue, what do we need. Then we work out what's the valuation of all the properties in the city of Burnside. We work out a rate in the dollar, and then we apply it to each of the properties. That's how we calculate your rates bill for the year. Again, another misconception, I think, is that council decide on the valuation of the properties, but we have no say in the valuation. The valuer general decides on the valuations, and there are ways of objecting. If you don't believe your property has been valued correctly, you can object to the valuer general and get it changed or get it assessed. So just comparatives on what our draft rates increases. This is excluding growth. And essentially what growth means is last year if we had one dwelling, this year if they've subdivided and created two, that additional one is considered as a growth property. So these percentages here are all excluding growth. So Burnside is pretty much in the lower half of the chart. And with some of the other ones, Marion, Port Adelaide, Charleston, all of their growth percentages are above 1%. So that's probably why the percentages are low as well. And of course, you've got the other, some of the outliers, but regional, Mid-Murray, that's 3.6, Playford's 3.5, Mitcham's 3.1 or 3.5. I think they've got two options to go with. Average rates increase, so we put together the rates increase for the past 5 years. And Burnside's looking pretty good. We're one of the lowest, but having said that, I'm pretty sure Norwood is pretty low as well. I just didn't have the information available. But yeah, again, just to compare, Campbelltown cumulatively has charged 16% over the 5 years compared to 11% by Burnside. Average rates is what is the rate that an average household in Burnside pays. And it is on the higher end, $1,700. And that is because our average valuation of properties is also pretty high compared to the other ones. But what's important is that our rate in the dollar is the lowest rate in the dollar amongst all councils. So what that means is if you had a property that was worth $700,000, in each of these council areas, we've mapped out how much you would pay. So in Burnside, you would pay $1,500, whereas in Salisbury, you would pay $3,000 for that. So the rate in the dollar, just to show the comparative, is the lowest. All right, now moving on to the long-term plan. So just a quick overview of the long-term plan, what it is and what we are doing or projecting with it. So the purpose of the long-term plan is to present a 10-year period, and it's a financial analysis and takes into account some assumptions. So we built a long-term plan based on long-term sustainability and equity principles. As I mentioned, this is the first year we're consulting on our long-term plan as well. But our draft long-term plan achieves surpluses in all years. We use debt only for new assets. Indicators are within the target ranges for all 10 years. And over the life of the long-term plan, we are replacing $99 million of assets and building new assets worth $16.4 million. Now, this version of the long-term plan compared to the last version is quite improved in terms of it has higher surpluses, lower rates, and much lower debt level. So just some assumptions that we've made. Of course, we need to use some indices and for each of the years, each of the 10 years. So just a quick snapshot to show you what we've used. Debt level, just to show it very clearly what our debt is. So at the end of the plan, year 10, you can see our debt comes down to 6.9. Having said that, there are no major capital projects in the long-term plan in the outer years. So if council decides to build something new or undertake some new capital projects, that number will obviously change. financial performance, just to show you what our total income and expenditure is and how we're doing in terms of surpluses. There are some pretty big numbers in the outer years, in excess of $2 million or close to. And of course, as I mentioned, there's not much capital work at the outer years, but also it'll depend on whether council want to reduce rates in those outer years or whether they provide new services or whether they maintain those surpluses and pay debt off faster. Long-term plan projects. So as I mentioned earlier, there's over the 10 years, all up, there's about $115 million in projects in the long-term plan. The indicators, so we've got two sets of indicators that we look at or use as a guide. One is the LGA target, and the other one is our audit committee recommendations. And all of our ratios basically are within both of those targets. And we use these to make sure that our plan is financially sustainable in the longer term. All right, next steps. So we're doing, of course, the public meeting tonight. The consultation period does end on the 31st of May, which is Friday at 5 p.m. So please get your survey in or any feedback in if you haven't done so already. We have a budget workshop for elected members on the 13th of June. It is open to the public, so please feel free to come along and listen to the discussion. And then the final revised budget will be presented to council on the 25th of June for adoption. As I mentioned, 31st of May is the last day for community consultation. So the number of ways you can provide your feedback through the survey. There's a survey form in your packs tonight if you'd like to fill those in. You can email through or post, might not reach Bernie in time, or of course via the internet. So any questions? So we'll open up for questions. If there's any from home or if there are any from here, happy to answer. And as Martin mentioned, we'll post all of the questions with the responses on the internet by Monday, 3rd of June. In your packs, what you will also find is a number of questions that were asked in the previous 3 years' budget meetings. We've provided responses to all of those questions again in case there's anything that is duplicated or if there's anything that you'd like to know.
Thanks, Karishma. I'm
Thank
just
you.
going to help out with the question time, like we did last year, for those of you that were here. I'm going to hand around the microphone so everyone can hear you, because we're also recording this so that people at home can hear. One question per person, and hopefully we'll be able to get round to fairly quickly. Any questions?
I've got about 4, but I'll start off with one.
Start with one and we'll share it round, Ron.
Thank you, Karishma, for your presentation. It's very good. Thank you. My first question is on rates. You mentioned in your presentation that the Valuer General, as of today, had a 3.2% projected increase. Now, I just wondered, in the preparation of the budget, what will happen if that changes, or are you going to, you would have prepared your budget on a different valuation, I would have expected. So this is a new valuation. So will you still just hold your expenditures, and move the rate in the dollar backwards or forwards?
Thank you for your question. That is correct. So essentially, the valuations might change by the time we're still getting valuations through from the Valuer General. They might change. All we do is just adjust the rate in the dollar. So essentially, the 2.4% would still stand for people. It's just that if the average valuation increases to, say, 5%, then the number of people being impacted by the higher than 2.4 or lower than 2.4 will change. But we just adjust the rate in the dollar.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any question? Yes.
It works. I'll have a little introduction before I go, start on the questioning, but I'd like to put the situation so that people know where I come from. In 1993, in May, I came to council, and I finished on council in November 07. First half of my time, the mayor was required to have at least 1 year's experience as a councillor, and for 10 years we did not have that existing. And I'd like to congratulate the new mayor on at least having previous service as a councillor. I think it counts a lot towards the successful leadership. There now, the other thing is that I'd forgotten how many times I've come here and I've asked the same question every year as my first question, and that is, why are we having this after the budget has been already written up? Because I think the residents should be given a chance to state what they want to see done, and that should be by having a meeting such as this for a planning meeting, not a judgment meeting, but a planning meeting in late January, early February.
Thank you for your question.
I'll be back with more.
Sorry.
That is a fair comment, and I know you made this comment last year as well. We did have a look at the timing for doing a pre-planning meeting in January, February. Even though the process is 9 months, it is very, very tight with deadlines. Having said that, I'm sure if we get any feedback tonight or through the surveys, I'm sure council will consider it before we adopt the budget. But for 2021, I will certainly try maybe starting the process even earlier to be able to fit some sort of consultation prior to this tonight happening. So I'll try and do that for 2021, but we just couldn't do it for 1920. The timings were too tight. And we had a new council as well. Sorry? I'm sure if you put in some really strong feedback about items that council will consider all feedback, because we do present a report with the detailed community consultation results and comments.
Can I add there's an example a couple of years ago where there was a non-inclusion of the Cottingham Street Dog Park. It was not included in the business plan and budget, and feedback from the community I think it was 2 years ago, resulted in that being included. Yeah. So we actually do listen to what the community is saying, and this is still our planning. Yeah, that was still this is part of our planning process anyway. Another question?
Yeah,
from-
just to... Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry. I might just add as well, this year we trialled a participatory budgeting initiative as well. So council allocated some money to going out to the community and saying, you tell us the stuff that you'd like to see happen that we haven't done, that's not on the budget yet, and we'll go through a process of seeing what we can fit in. So we ran a pilot this year that was quite successful, and we're looking at doing that next year as well. So there are other opportunities in addition to this for the community to get their projects that haven't been done yet, that they're keen to see done, raised with council too.
List.
Just while Aaron's getting comfortable, I appreciate your sentiment, Alan, but just wanted to say that this is absolutely a draft budget. So I know you said, it feels like water off the duck's back, but I'm sure there will be a number of changes to the final budget when, as I mentioned, there's a number of items we still haven't included in the draft budget. The indices have changed. The funding or federal budget impacts are not in there yet. The assessments of the assets is not in there yet. So absolutely, this is the opportunity to provide input as well, and council will consider it before we adopt the budget. But taking your feedback as well on board, we'll try and do something next year as well.
So the scheme that Michelle was talking about is called Your Neighbourhood Budget. What we do is we will promote the scheme probably around about August, September, call for nominations for projects. We'll do that via in focus by Engage Birdside, all our sort of normal techniques. Once we get the projects in, we'll then put it to the community to actually vote on those projects, which ones they would like to see implemented by council.
Well, thank you for that information. I wish I'd have known that back in August. Yeah, I haven't heard a brass razoo on that program from the council. And if I've got a criticism of the council, it's about community engagement. Sorry. I just don't think it's assertive enough. And I'm sure people would be more engaged if the opportunity to talk on the budget and priorities was made available to them, similar to what my friend over there said. But that leads me into my Dulwich area. People are going bonkers in Dulwich over parking and a local area traffic management scheme. And I attended a meeting of DAP on behalf of the people in Dulwich Avenue more particularly, and a council officer indicated that there would be a local area traffic management as a result of the building of 170 Fullerton Road. And yeah, I've banged on several doors, the previous mayor, and certainly we've been at the council, a number of us have been about the council to doing that. Now, as far as I can read, there's no funding in the budget for a local area traffic management approach in that Dulwich area. And I think people, there's a great deal of angst. I know it's partly driven from the parking restrictions, but there's a whole raft of issues surrounding that. And based on my background experience, I think we need a strategic approach to handling that, and we need to do it in this financial year, because one of the problems that we're going to have, or council's going to have, is the development at Glenside and the impact that they'll have on the traffic management. And we're feeling that already. But I'll just put that out there, if I may.
Thank you for the question. I think I can answer the budget-related one. I think one of the comments was there wasn't any funding in the budget for next year. It is in there, it's just in the operational section. So it's because it's not a capital item, you can't specifically see it in the capital project, but we've got a budget line called traffic calming, which is essentially doing traffic studies, etc. But it's operational, so we do have some funding in the budget. And I'm sure Martin and Paul perhaps would take the other strategic approach.
Yeah.
Side of things.
Thanks for your comments, Ron. You may or may not be aware that this was an item on Council's agenda yesterday evening, where we gave a report providing an update on the recent consultation processes that have taken in place in Dulwich, both face-to-face with members, representatives of the community, and from that consultation process. We have recognised the feedback, the concerns about the introduction of unrestricted parking, and we have put that on hold until we can undertake some further consultation with all stakeholders. We're not expecting to come back with some recommendations on that until later on this year. As you mentioned yourself, there are other considerations. This is quite a complex scenario with the Glenside development taking place as well. Our operating budget, as Karishma confirmed, does include the opportunity to do that. We also have quarterly reviews through the year, so if we need to change our strategy with that, we're able to do that too. So we are working very closely with the ward councillors and are listening to all the feedback from the community.
Thank you.
Before I go back to Alan, any other questions from someone who hasn't said anything yet? You do have one.
Thank you. I picked up the from the council chambers or the council office last week. Just going through that, on page 35 it's got Civic Centre upgrade, page 39 Civic Centre renewal works, and I'm just curious to know what that covers. I regularly go to the library and I find the public toilets in the Civic Centre are very basic. I don't think they're clean during the day, and I think they could be improved, so I'm interested to see if that's going to be on the agenda.
Thank you for your question. So the reason they're separated out is the upgrades portion relates to works that are considered new or upgrade work, and the renewal is around renewing existing assets. I'm pleased to say that the community centre toilets downstairs are on the list as part of that renewal program of works for next year. So you'd be pleased to there'll be some new bathrooms going in there shortly. The upgrade works will be continuation of the works we've been doing to upgrade the old town hall so we could return it to community use and have the community reusing that space. So we've done a lot of work to the structure this year, and next year we'll be doing the bathrooms up there as well, and putting in another accessible bathroom, a DDA accessible bathroom.
Yeah, sorry. Open space and acquisition and provision of in the Dulwich area, because that's where we come from, and that's what I represent, or I represent the people in there. Yeah, it was great to see the work that's been done over on the hub, Glenside rather, and what's happening at Kensington Gardens, and the constable, whatever his name is, Hyde, thank you. And yeah, I think whilst it wasn't for me to vote on it, things like that, they're all very good initiatives. But poor old Dulwich, 4 years ago, the then mayor indicated to a number of us that he would speak to the City of Adelaide about doing something on Victoria Park. Now, he didn't do anything about it, because my colleague was an old colleague, is the mayor, or was the mayor of the City of Adelaide. But I just wonder if the council could focus on the lack of open space opportunities in the playground facilities, for those of us in that Dulwich area and Rose Park. And the Rose Park School does use Victoria Park, or did use Victoria Park for footy, but I think they've been kicked into touch on that. But there are a vast number of opportunities that are available on Victoria Park, but council, because of the way the land ownership works and things like that, I think the onus is on the Burnside Council to see what we can do on Victoria Park, because it would be too expensive, in my humble opinion, to get acquisition of a property or properties in the Dulwich Rose Park area. So that's why I'm suggesting that we take it up with the City of Adelaide and see what could be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Not sure that's a question, so I'll take your comments on board.
I'll just put it on the table.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. We'll take it on board, and we made a note of it, so if any opportunities do present itself, we can certainly have a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron preceded my question in respect of open space. Beaumont Ward is seriously lacking in open space, and if the rumours hold any water, the fact that the previous nursery is going to be put up for sale, that's the loss of an even nice, minute piece of open space. And it's my desire that we retain that so that it is used as it was to start. We don't need any more buildings in Beaumont, because you can't drive down many streets because cars are parked on both sides. We do not need to sell any open space. How much do we have to plead or demand to have that set down hard and fast?
Thank you, Alan. I think general consensus is don't listen to rumours. We haven't made any decisions on council. Look, oh, sorry, Paul. Fair enough.
As Karishma said, Alan, don't listen to rumours, and when the council makes a decision, that will be the decision it makes, and the community will be informed of that decision at that point in time. But until it makes a decision, there is no decision. So rumour is speculation.
The trouble is, speculation is often the true bearer of the message.
In this case, it isn't, and as I said, until the council makes a decision, I will guarantee that when the council makes a decision, the community will be informed of that decision, whatever that is.
But that's not answering my answer.
Well, I can't answer on behalf of the council, Alan, so...
Can I just add to that a little bit? Sorry, I'll just add to that a little bit and say that I'm assuming you're referring to the Laurel Avenue nursery site. That's designated as community land at the moment, so if council did decide to even consider selling that land, that community land title would need to be revoked first, which means going through a full public consultation process, so you would be well aware of any intention to do that before any decision was made and have plenty of opportunity to input.
Alan, Aaron just mentioned that a council report is going up in July on the Laurel Avenue site, so of course it'll be public as well, so you can have a read of that. But I'm sure that's just the options or something, yeah, so, yeah. But we'll have to consider all options, of course, and as Michelle added, there's a number of complications with
Don't dare trespass on it, because you will be told where to go.
Just in the McGill Village, page 35, PLEC, what's that stand for? Is that it?
sorry, what is that?
What's PLEC works? What's the PLEC mean?
I'm going to try and remember what the acronym... Thank you. Thank you. It's basically a commission that looks at co-funding undergrounding of power lines. So we've had some funding, some contribution from them to underground the power lines along McGill Road.
Go back to Alan first.
This is a fairly old one as well. Going over the years, even before I came to council, through my occupations in the police force, I sought the installation of traffic lights at the intersection of Gillies Road, North Street and Portrush Road. Now, we've got some idiots in the state transport area who seem to think that that would interrupt the flow of heavy trucks. Well, that's exactly what we want to do, because it's a race paddock many times of the day. When you go, if you're on Portrush Road at the right time of the day, you will find not just one, not just two, but on one occasion I come across 6 3x2 screaming up the road, and I would say they were pushing more than 60k. So it's about time we told the Department of Transport to lift their game and give us what we want, because the road is, Gillies Road is like a parking station with people dropping their kids off for Seymour College. Are we interested in giving protection for the people who go to and from the school? Because there is a precedent for this situation to have traffic lights. If we go over to Norwood, Beulah Road...
Stick to the city,
yeah.
and we'll get
Yeah, no, I've got it because I have to have a comparison. Beulah Road has traffic lights installed to stop north-south traffic on Portrush Road purely for bicycles to cross the road. And they don't pay any road registration.
Thank you, Alan. As you mentioned, this is a question you've asked in previous years, and I have actually provided the answer in your pack already. It's question number 15. But in short, you're right, it is a Dipty road. Unfortunately, we don't have control over that. We have spoken to Dipty in the past about the issues and installation of traffic calming devices, but Dipty has not come to the party yet. So we'll continue having conversations with them, but yeah, we don't really have much control given it's a Dipty road.
No, it's not the council.
Dare I say, this is a question I've asked every year. A discount on paying your rates by 12 months. I did have a look at your questions or answers, but I can't see it there. Is it there?
I'll tell you what the response is. We did do a cost benefit of providing an incentive for early payment of rates, but we actually found that it wasn't really viable. As you can imagine, a number of our ratepayers do pay early, and I can't remember the exact statistics, but we would have needed at least 50% people to pay early to make up that 1% discount that we provide. So we decided not to go ahead with an incentive scheme for early payment of rates. So sorry. See you next year. We'll have all the responses in the packs next year. Thank you for your time this evening.